I don't know if you've noticed, but it's really happening. It's kind of hard to miss. The scaffolding going up around the bell tower and right here in the nave is the fruit of years of labor, thought, research, and conversation. The when and the how has been so long a topic of conversation and discussion. I have to confess that I was really beginning to wonder if this project would ever really happen at all. Sorry, Luke.
Your sins are forgiven.
But honestly, the size and the scope of this project is remarkable. It seems like the impossible. And it's this tension, this questioning of whether we have what it takes to do the work that we need to do. It's a question that I experience whenever I read the Gospel according to Matthew. In the context of today's passage, Jesus is sending his disciples out to be his emissaries in the world, to do the simple and manageable tasks of curing the sick, raising the dead, cleansing leopards, and casting out demons. In return, Jesus warns his friends about the likelihood of rejection and hostility. Sign me up! Throughout the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus is unequivocal about the cost of discipleship. It gives me pause. I wonder, am I up for the task? Is anyone? Are you? Perhaps it is reserved for the spiritual greats, the Desmond Tutus of the world. You know, the sort of people who struggle to end apartheid, establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and just happen to spread joy wherever they go, just for good measure. Perhaps the spiritual life is not for me. Maybe I'm not worthy of the work. But then in this passage, Jesus jolts us out of despair. He begins with what some might consider greatness, welcoming prophets, receiving a prophet's reward. But he doesn't stop there, speaking in concentric circles of what one might consider to be smaller and smaller impacts, offering hospitality to a righteous person, and then finally, he addresses a humble act of hospitality offered to the little ones in the disciples' name. Who are the little ones, exactly? The text is not clear. In the version of this passage in Luke and Mark, the writers explicitly indicate children. But here in Matthew, it could be children or the disciples. Regardless, it is a simple act offered to and for people of little account, according to society. And that's the point. Discipleship is not necessarily a life of grand, impressive gestures. It is instead a life committed over and over to small acts of hospitality and connection. Here's what I realized watching the workers build that scaffolding. This doesn't get trucked in as one impressively large and ready-made piece. Rather, it comes together, piece by piece. Each of these pieces, relative to the scope of the project, are small. But together, they build something that surrounds the entirety of the bell tower, from the ground up to its heights, creating a container that allows workers to make the repairs necessary for the safety and longevity of the structure. It's the same way in our common life, striving to be faithful. We are called to make connections, to build a people and a community that reflects God's dream for the world. Jesus reminds us, whoever extends hospitality in ways large or small will receive their reward. It's tempting to hear this as eternal repayment of good deeds offered, but I think Jesus is talking about the joy that comes from being a connector, the pleasure we experience in extending kindness. What's more, when there's an entire community of connectors, something remarkable begins to take shape. We discover the simple act of offering a cup of cold water is one small piece, building something bigger and more beautiful, of building a beloved community in which we desire to live. In his book Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell popularized insights of social network theory in a chapter entitled The Power of the Few. He refers especially to the work of social connectors who enable the development of complex networks of people and ideas. In a movement like Christianity, such individuals were and are crucial of its spread to the ends of the earth. It comes as no surprise, then, that Jesus takes time to emphasize the reception of the disciples in their mission. The divine mission is as much about the unnamed people who provide a thirsty servant a cold drink of water as the familiar names that dot the pages of church histories. In fact, in the New Testament, we only have one narrative account of the church's mission, the book of Acts, and we encounter many such minor characters. Maybe they get a verse here of mention or a couple small stories there, but truly they are only minor in the sense that their contributions to God's mission surely surpass the airtime they receive. Their hospitality and social connections were decisive in the spread of the Christian way. Too often, we see hospitality to the little ones as a pietistic act meant to teach us, maybe, equality, equity, and justice. We, and particularly people perhaps with a lot of privilege, take on this sense of a solemn duty and inherit a sacrificial responsibility of spiritual ancestors. We sometimes imagine that service to God means sacrifice, and like modern-day Abrahams, we take God's promise of abundant life and sacrifice it on the altar of righteous duty. It's tempting to think about offering cups of cold water to the little ones, to people we might say on the margins. But I think that might be missing the point. Rather, in the community that God is building, there are no margins. That's not to say that there are not people in society who are overlooked or marginalized, because we know there are too many people who are. But that's not part of God's blueprint. In the same way that there's no marginal piece of scaffolding, the little ones are absolutely integral to the whole. It's about how everyone fits together. It's about how we connect and the strength of those connections. That's the beautiful thing God is building. Lately, for me, it's been people who are new to this world and those who are getting ready to pass out of it, who have been underscoring this truth for me. Playing with my 7-month-old daughter.
It goes fast.
Time does go fast. I can't believe it's been 7 months. I found myself from time to time approaching her with a favorite toy in hand and magnanimous attitude, like, all right, I'm gonna be the good mom. What's funny is my daughter will look straight past the toy, make eye contact with me, and giggle, skipping the pretense or any kind of show and going straight to the heart of the matter, straight to connection. Because that's what this is about. Time, relationship, connection. And the same is true, I've found, for spending time with loved ones who are about to pass out of this world. The cup of cold water is the smallest of deeds, that they almost don't seem like deeds at all. Standing by the bedside of someone you love who's dying, it comes down to the squeeze of a hand. Saying, I love you in whatever way you can. These deeds are, once again, about time, relationship, connection, and being in the sacred, heartbreaking space of someone you love on the cusp of eternity. It can be unclear who is serving whom. Because in those moments, life and time and love all become part of the whole. And they remind us that that's all there ever is. Everything else is distraction. These experiences transform and are transforming my understanding of what service is. Service is no longer about the comfortable trying to make the distressed more comfortable. That can make service problematic. It's the way the comfortable can say, we're a bunch of people at the center whose lives are normal and sorted and privileged, and we really ought to open the doors and welcome people in and be a bit more thoughtful and kind and generous. But this creates a patronizing and paternalistic service model. It assumes a center and a periphery, where the center gives kindly hospitality to the periphery, and the periphery feels humiliated, and the center feels smug. But instead, it's like playing with a baby, standing with someone we love as they're about to transition. It's about our common humanity and connecting in our common humanity. The cup of cold water is not an act of service that one does for another, but it's part of a transformational act that builds something greater, that makes us all better, where there are no margins, just connecting piece after connecting piece. I think Jesus is trying to teach us something about seeing ourselves in the way that Jesus' ministry works. Maybe he's hoping we'll understand humility in a new way. By pointing to the least of these, perhaps he is suggesting that simple service and hospitality might not be the end, but rather a means to a greater end. He is challenging us to expand our connections, build relationships with people whom we might otherwise be tempted to overlook. Jesus has a unique perspective as a leader, always on the fringe and yet at the very heart of creation. Maybe Jesus was teaching us not just an ethic of service, but a means of sharing his liberating good news. Perhaps what this gospel is teaching us, it's not that in giving we serve, but in being connectors. That's the way the good news is spread. This gospel is inviting us to a place of humility, building relationships across societal divides, where true change begins. This morning, I hear Jesus saying, be a connector. Bring your piece to be part of the whole. From that, I'll build all the scaffolding we need. Amen.